Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Charles, and I welcome you guys to another episode of the Dreamerspro Show, where we cover everything from sports, hot topics, classic debates, entertainment, and where we give you guys a fresh perspective on things and how we see them. And today we have another interesting episode for you guys that I'm sure the majority are going to enjoy. So make sure you go ahead and like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, I've come to realize something very interesting about the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan. I think the time when Michael Jordan played in the NBA, I think we can kind of consider that point in time as sort of like the golden era of basketball, if we're being honest. I think a lot of people who look back, on those years, the late 80s, early 90s, all leading up to the 2000s. I think a lot of people look at those years with nostalgia, right? I think a lot of people think back and they're like, wow, that was a great time, to be an NBA fan and all of these different things. And also given the fact that social media wasn't what it is now. Back then, there was no social media, there was no Twitter, there was no Facebook, any of that. So it's either you saw it live or you heard about it on the radio, or that was pretty much it. You read about it or something like that. It's not like now where you can go back and something happens. If you watch a playoff game today, you can react to it. It can turn it into a big story and all of these different things. So those events can saturate. Whereas back then it happened, and then as time goes on, we're sitting back wondering, what was really the backstory of this? What was the backstory of that? If you see two teammates get into a spat, it's something that they could talk about in a week. And then one of the players that's probably on the team can come out, and you may see him on the JJ Redick podcast, and they'll say, hey, what happened between so-and-so guy? And you can kind of hear you can really hear what, transpired. But back then we didn't really get a lot of that. And I think NBA fans were just totally enamored by what Michael Jordan stood for, not just on the court, but off the court. He was a phenomenon unto himself. If we really think about, the impact that he had on basketball, where everyone literally wanted to be like him. He even made having a bald head be something that was, pretty interesting. And I think it's the same thing. It's the same type of feeling people get when they talk about the golden era of hip hop. For those of you who follow hip hop or into hip hop, whenever they start talking about Tupac, Biggie stories, what happened in 1994, 1993, 1992, or 1996, 1997, 98, 98, people to this day are still interested in what transpired back then. We're talking about tens of millions of people. If you watch, some of these interviews on YouTube, they get tens of millions of views because people are just captivated by that, by that time on Earth, right? It's just something that, it is the way that it is. And I think it's the same thing that you see with the Michael Jordan and Chicago Bulls, that type of era. And yesterday I was listening to an ESPN insider, and she was actually talking to Brian Windhorst on his podcast. And she was talking about, Michael Jordan's reaction to the way the public kind of received the Last Dance documentary. So before we go too far, I want to play a little bit of her comments to just, so she can explain how Jordan sort of felt about it, and we'll come back here and unpack it. So take a listen to that.
Jordan was great. Jordan made this whole thing for us. And I told him that right before it came out. I texted him and said, oh, yeah, this was thanks again, because he has so much to offer. And I think I probably caught him at a good time. I don't think he was particularly thrilled with the blowback from The Last Dance and some of the things that came back at him. I think some of it flummoxed him a little bit, to be honest. And, he's pretty introspective these days. I think losing Kobe was a huge blow for him. They really were very good friends. And we really chronicle the amount of time they spent together, and the amount of times Kobe called Jordan, sometimes in the middle of the night. And Jordan would, he'd be asking him these very specific questions, and Jordan would be talking to him, and they'd lie back down and say, why the hell am I doing this? Why am I giving this kid all my secrets? I've never done this with anybody else. Why am I doing it for this kid? And I think the answer really was that he was in many ways just flattered that Kobe wanted to be him. He strived to be him and then be better than him. And of course, he never quite got to that peak. He got pretty close. And so for me, having Jordan as a thread all the way through, the tough Jordan, the punch Steve Kerr Jordan, all the way to the very soft side at the end of Jordan, giving Kobe his secrets, sharing, crying like a baby at Kobe's funeral, sort of. Mm-hmm. So for me, in a lot of ways, the evolution of the NBA icon was what this was about. But for me, in many ways, it was the evolution of Michael Jordan, to be honest, because he wasn't one of the guys that was sharing information. Dr. J was the first person that said to him, if you ever need anything, call me. And Michael said, "Thank you, Julius," and then never called him because he thought, nope, I had to do this on my own.
So there's a lot to unpack here. I think many people believe that the reason that Michael Jordan decided to commission the making of the Last Dance documentary was after LeBron James beat the Warriors. I think it was in the 2015, 2016 NBA Finals. I think a lot of people felt at the time that, Jordan wanted to put that out to sort of, ingratiate the younger generation with who he really was. And to a certain extent, I believe it, but I don't believe that Jordan did it out of fear. Like some people try to say, oh, Jordan saw what was coming and he got afraid. So he went out there and was like, hurry up and let's make. First of all, that footage was out there. They didn't just get that footage, just a few years ago. This was footage that they always had, right? This was something that they always wanted to do to chronicle his career. And I was listening to Adam Silver on the Dan Patrick Show a few days ago, and he was actually talking about that. He was one of the people that was, I think, that approached Chicago Bulls and Jordan and them about that idea. This is, over a decade ago, 2 decades ago, right? So it's not like as if, oh, Jordan was like, okay, hurry up. No, this was something that was already, something they were working on. I think they were looking for the right moment, in the right context to release it in. So, I think Jordan, this was something that he was already working on. I don't think he was doing it out of fear. I think Jordan probably did it because I think he wanted to set the record straight, right? I think Jordan probably was just like, what is happening here? Like, so this is what happens when I don't post on social media, when I don't post on Twitter. This is what happens. All of a sudden, people are saying that some people are better than me or just as good as me. Like, this is what happens. So I think Jordan did that to set the record straight. Now, as far as him being flummoxed, to use her word, about the way audiences perceived him in the Last Dance documentary, I think what we saw, with the Chicago Bulls when they took us behind the curtains, in that docuseries, I think is the same thing you would see at any high performing, organization or competitive environment, if we're being totally honest. I think these type of environments can be contentious and it can get uncomfortable at times, if we're being honest, right? I think that's normal. I don't think what we saw with the Chicago Bulls is something foreign from any other great sports team or great organization. If we think back and we think about Steve Jobs, for example, Steve Jobs is, he's one of the greatest businessmen of all time, right? One of the greatest thinkers and creative people of all time. But there's so many stories out there of him just being a jerk, right? He was a tough guy to work with. He was, he was uncompromising. When you wouldn't get things done for him, he would tear you out. He would just rip people apart. So Steve Jobs also has that same reputation, but I don't think it's just Steve Jobs. I think there are a lot of people out there that we don't know about, business people, athletes, whoever it is, entertainers, that have that same type of thing. I don't think it's bad. I just think that people have different ways of leading. And in this particular instance, it was the way that Michael Jordan led. I think if Jordan feels a type of way of, about maybe people looking at him like maybe he's a mean guy, he's a jerk and all of these, I think all of that is irrelevant, to be quite honest with you. I think Jordan did it the way that he knew how to do it, right? At the time, I don't think Jordan was out there asking somebody, how do you lead? And if you listen a little bit more to that piece that we played here, she actually spoke about the fact of Jordan being reluctant to ask great players before him, like Dr. J and others, for advice, because he wanted to figure things out on his own. And I think that's what he was doing. He was trying to figure it out, on his own. And I think competitive environments, sometimes you see, people go at each other. Sometimes businesses, right? They can compete against each other fiercely. You can see this one business suing the other business. It happens all the time. It's not like I say, oh, Jordan, this happens. And sometimes competitors talk trash. You see businessmen go up at different events and say, they'll be talking about this guy. Yeah, this guy doesn't really know what he's doing. And it happens in politics. People get competition is a part of reality, right? So I don't think, Jordan should feel bad about how people perceive him, because at the end, he achieved the results that he wanted to achieve. I don't think Jordan's goal coming into the NBA was to be the nicest guy or to be the nicest leader. I think his job was to win. And I think he accomplished that, obviously, at a very high level. So the question really to you guys is this. Number one, how do you think Jordan ultimately will be perceived, in your eyes, because you guys are the audience? How do you think he'll be perceived? Do you think he'll be perceived as an extreme winner, or he was just a guy that won a lot, but he was a jerk?